Roll sound.
Australia got its own sound in the 60s. From the migrant heartbeat of the suburbs.
That is nothing short of an obscenity.
Over the airwaves came its rebellious call, and soon the whole world was listening.
This is going to be our next big band.
You just feel it.
They were a machine.
This is it, folks.
It's the sound.
Over the top.
It was the sound of a generation, born from a musical family.
Alberts.
Alberts again.
The sound that killed the cultural cringe.
And are you going to change your style much?
We ain't going to change for nobody.
The Albert sound. An Australian sound. In the 60s, there was one man who thought it was possible, who quietly produced this loud music into being.
He had this thing about putting Australia on the map musically, you know.
Sometimes looked like an undercover policeman trying to be groovy, you know.
He didn't live the rock and roll life.
Ted was very serious, a very polite man, a guy that wore a tie.
Ted Albert was born into a musical dynasty. The Alberts' empire was built on publishing the American songbook. But Ted had a rebel's dream. He wanted Australia to have its own modern songbook.
For Teddy, I think it was what made him get up in the morning, really. Music was just a very big part of his life.
He would nurture a wild bunch of migrant working-class kids into a musical dynasty. And together they would create a sound that would capture the world.
He didn't seem to be a person who crumbled under cannon fire.
He said, I love your sound. I love what you do. I thought, Jesus, here's a bloke that looks like he could be running a bank. And I just thought, he understands. He gets it.
Ted became a board member of the Alberts Company at age 25. And in his first meeting, he began his life's work.
Board minutes, 1963. Mr. Ted Albert said he would like the company to begin to produce records and to explore the idea of an Australian sound of popular music.
There wasn't much to explore in 1963. Our parents' taste in music had never been so bad. But somehow, Ted saw the change that was coming. What he didn't know was that same year a family had arrived in Sydney with a new sound in its blood. And their stories were about to intertwine. They came from the working-class streets of Glasgow. Three of the greatest guitarists and songwriters in music history from the one family, George, Malcolm, and Angus Young. They hailed from the post-war scheme of Cranhill. It was a tough place to grow up. But the Youngs never forgot where they came from.
You've got to remember at this time, Glasgow has the coal industry, it has the shipyards, the air is thick and black, and it's into this atmosphere that the Young family kind of thrives in many ways because they're tough. And there's a lot of them. You know, there really is that clan mentality. Blood is everything.
William and Margaret Young put 8 children onto those mean streets. Music ran in the blood.
The whole family are musical. Their family was like my family in Liverpool. I'm from one of 10. 6 sisters and 4 brothers. The youngs are from, I think, 1 or 50. They're terrible. There was people everywhere. You didn't know which one was the young.
For the youngest of the youngs, Angus, it meant he had plenty of music teachers.
Each brother I had kind of would show you a little bits of, you know, music or what they liked. And even my oldest brother, Stevie, was trying to put me behind the piano, trying to show him. No, you do it like this with these fingers. You play this way, you know.
The big freeze of 1963 was the worst winter on record. The snow was 8 feet deep. At the same time, an ad appeared on the telly offering a different life.
Come over to the sunny side now. Australia, a great place for families.
Australia was being sold to the British public as a paradise. They've never had snow in Australia. It never rains in Australia. You have Christmas Day on the beach.
You could be on your way to a sunnier future in the new year.
The ad tipped the balance. The Youngs opted for Australia. The Crown Hill School yearbook records the day they left. 15 of the Youngs left Scotland, bound for Botany Bay. 7-year-old Angus promptly vomited on arrival.
So we gets off the plane in Sydney. I looked around and I said to my wife, there's not a soul in this country knows me. It's a weird feeling. No friends, no one.
Drummer Snowy Fleet arrived from Liverpool with his wife and daughter around the same time.
Got on a bus and my missus going, oh, look at the palm trees, aren't they nice? You know, and all it was all beautiful. But as we drove out of the city and we started to get in the bush, we didn't know where we were. And all I could hear were all these things making noises, crickets and God knows what. I thought, we're in the jungle. You know, it was that bad.
The young family were wondering why they'd left their beloved Scotland. Sydney rained for 6 solid weeks after the Youngs arrived. They would wake to find snakes in their dry bedding, escaping the wet floor of their new home.
It's been suggested that bad weather makes people moody and irritable. But is that an excuse for a punch-up?
By day, the Aussies came round looking for a fight. When he wasn't scrapping with the locals, the 5th son, 16-year-old George Young, was playing music in the hostel's wash house. He met a brilliant lead guitarist from Holland, whose name he couldn't pronounce. Johannes Vandenberg became Harry Vanda, thanks to George. The Australia they'd landed in was primed for rebellion. In 1963, a third of the country was under 20. Kids everywhere were ready to explode.
I can't get no satisfaction.
All they needed was a soundtrack.
I think the adults criticise us all the time, and they forget that once they were young, they like to do crazy things too. They just criticise us, but because we're trying to have a bit of fun.
You're going to mug me?
I'm not going to mug you.
Is that gorgeous or what, eh?
And I believe I can run a decent marathon.
Thank you very much.
Download Veely now.
Albert's was the last company you'd expect to deliver the soundtrack of a generation. The company founder, Jacques Albert, hailed from Fribourg, Switzerland, a civilized, tidy town. Oddly quiet, this birthplace of a rock and roll dynasty. Jacques had emigrated to Sydney with nothing but his young family and the clothes on his back. His young wife died, but J. Alberton's son went on to flourish. Almost a century later, the company headquarters still felt a little old school. FIFA Riccobono was just 16 when she started as a secretary. One day, she would run the company.
All of this was so alien to me, and they had all these beautiful old paintings of, like, Frank Albert and his father Jacques, the founder, and they used to just be behind you in the accounts department and they'd be just staring at you. And it was this really eerie feeling that you were being looked at.
Behind the decor, Ted Albert was plotting revolution, and he now had a green light from the board. The company would sign artists, write and produce records aimed at capturing the new rock and roll audience. It was Ted's chance to put his stamp on the old firm.
Quite amazing when you think that their biggest selling things when Ted took over was the Boomerang Songbook and the harmonicas, you know, and here we are with the Beatles and everything else going on around you. Who the hell wants a songbook and a harmonica?
Well, I get up in the morning, get something to eat now, or go to work, I just go to. I come home in the evening and go still in bed. Got a man got what you gonna do? Now that I'm sick and tired for that, enough with you and I know now.
Ted's first signing was Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, who took their manager's mum along to help clinch the deal.
In those days, you didn't really understand the way it worked. You just wanted to be a pop star. You wanted girls to scream at you when you went out. You wanted to be famous, and you wanted a #1 hit record. That's it. Whoever could bring you that, yeah, I'll sign there.
When the Beatles toured Australia in 1964, Thorpe and the Aztecs kept the Beatles from the #1 spot in the charts, an unimagined feat for an Australian band.
I'm telling you, pop that jive. Don't wanna find yourself outside on the playground. What you gonna
They were still dressing British while sounding American, but change was on the way.
Ted did just have this uncanny knack for picking a hit. He listened to a lot of the music coming out of overseas, so he was very keyed into what was happening.
Out on the edge of suburbia, the sound Ted was searching for was coming together. George and Harry had found a baby-faced singer who had a gift for a catchy lyric. Now all they needed was a drummer.
He put a note on my door. He said, "You're from Liverpool, I believe you play the drums." They played me the music that they was used to. I said, "How about some of the stuff that I was listening to in Liverpool?" I brought all my records out. Played, and George went, "Yes." He loved the beat, George.
They called themselves the Easybeats, and within months they were playing big gigs like Surf City in King's Cross.
Thank you. Hello.
That's our manager.
Oh, yes.
They hired a real estate agent for a manager in 1964. Mike Vaughan had one priceless connection.
We've just made ourselves a good deal.
He knew Ted Albert. The Easybeats were invited down to Radio 2 UW Theatre to audition for Mr. Albert.
We were told to be on our best behaviour because this was a gentleman that was coming to see us. Not the sort of bloke that you swear in front of, you know what I mean? Well, not at least the first meeting, you know? And for us, it was like a proper performance in front of Ted. I mean, everything hung on it as far as we were concerned, you know?
It was the meeting of two clans for the Youngs and the Alberts.
Ted was down on his hands and knees tinkering with microphones and just doing all sorts of things, playing with the music, and George really clocked that.
A close bond began that day, forged over music.
He was a man who had a very extraordinary understanding of sound and how it worked. And I think all the way back then, that relationship between Ted and the Easybeats was really born.
The fuse was lit for some of the greatest music Australia would ever produce, written and performed by 16-year-old kids.
#1 in riffs that you can't play without a cheeky smile on your face. Even when you play it wrong.
She's So Fine had all the ingredients of the new Australian sound. A formula that would define the Easybeats and reach its zenith in AC/DC. A killer riff that hooked you from the start. A guitarist who could summon the heavens. And a singer who discharged a casual air of rebellion.
You look at a singer and a performer like that and you think, he's having infinitely more fun than anyone else, and I want to be that guy.
It was the soundtrack young Australia had been waiting for. Easy Fever began.
We done a show in Perth. We had 8,000 kids at the airport. And it was like that no matter where we went in Australia. Hotels, you go into your hotel after the show, you'd open a cupboard door and 6 chicks would fall out. And it was all of that. Stephen had someone posted herself to Stephen in a box.
Yeah, they've got real good sound. I think they're fantastic. Oh, I simply adore little Stevie. Yes, it's only 17, they write their own records. You know, they're the most fantastic group in Australia, I think.
How do they compare with the Beatles?
Oh, they're better by millions. They're better by millions.
Australia became their oyster. There was a special chemistry at work. A band who could ignite the fire, teamed with a producer who could fan the flames. Ted Albert was convinced Australian music sounded too soft, and he produced the Easybeats loud.
He said, I want to play you something, and can you tell me honestly what you think about it? And this song came out through these huge speakers. The whole office shook. And he said, what do you think? I said, Ted, you and I both know that we've just listened to an absolute, certain #1 hit record. And this big smile came out of his face, and it was Sorry by the Easybeats.
Had a date with her.
Sorry was the first Australian single recorded with feedback before the Beatles or the Stones. Fame chased them. A magazine had published where the young family lived in Burwood, causing a house invasion.
They trampled youngster Malcolm trying to get at George.
When 10-year-old Angus came home, it was mayhem.
I just saw all these people. I saw police, because they kind of barricaded it off. And I was trying to explain to a policeman, I'm saying, you know, I live there, can I get in my house? And the policeman said, yeah, they're all saying that, fella, you know.
Only a year out of Villawood Migrant Hostel, their lives had been transformed. The Easybeats were ready to take on the world. Ted agreed to back them. He sent Easybeats manager Mike Vaughan to New York to score a worldwide record deal. Mike stayed with Aussie journalist Lillian Roxon, who fell in love with the Easybeats and with Mike's mission.
The suspense is killing me. Will this simple, unspoilt young man from Strathfield, New South Wales swing the biggest deal in Australian showbiz history and become the new Brian Epstein? Will the Easybeats show the Yanks what music really is? Or will they fade away into obscurity in North Cunnamulla?
On the last day of the trip, Mike Vaughan signed a contract with United Artists. The Easybeats would record at the legendary Abbey Road Studios in London. Ted Albert would produce. The boys had a ticket to ride. They were poised on the edge of greatness.
In the pop business, particularly in the 60s, the holy grail was to make it swing in London. And of course, George being as he is, the leader of the group, and this incredible desire to always go further, that's where we're going to go.
They left Australia as heroes, vowing not to compromise the sound they had created.
And are you going to change much with your style of music in the pop world?
No, it will be an Australian sound. We'll definitely try to get our own sound. Not a Beatles sound, or a Rolling Stones sound.
It was a golden place and time to be in a band. A youth revolution was in play. All the world's talented musicians were heading there.
The London scene was so great. You know, I could literally fall out of my door and go and see Ike and Tina Turner. I think I was sweated on by Tina Turner.
The Easies had left Australia to mass hysteria. Now, they were nobodies.
There was hundreds of bands, all wanting a microphone. What can we contribute to all of this? How can we make ourselves so different?
And we did everything possible to sort of fit in fast and sort of, you know, and come up with a hit.
Ted flew in from Oz, and sessions began at Abbey Road. This was going to be their international breakthrough. But for the first time, Ted and the Easybeats didn't deliver a hit. United Artists thought the songs were way too simple, and they blamed Ted.
It was just a different game. It wasn't Australia anymore. You know, they were now trying to impress the world, and it was quite elusive trying to find the big hit that was needed.
The record company decided a new producer was the answer. So Ted flew home, and a new chapter began.
I imagine that would have been hard for him, because I think he was so inextricably intertwined with everything the Easybeats had done, the surge, the energy, the sound of them.
But Ted wasn't the type to wallow in self-pity. Back in Sydney, his search for an Australian sound continued as he signed and recorded caveman rockers The Throb and The Missing Links.
So we're out there, donk, 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 yeah, thumping and bashing.
Ted produced them into the charts.
I mean, we were arguably the first long-haired band in Australia, and it wasn't, you look at far, it wasn't that long, but we used to get chased out of suburbs with irate mobs.
To come out with Billy Thorpe as the first one, and The Missing Links and The Throb and the Easybeats, how fantastic is that? You know, at a time when you're just starting something brand new.
Ted sent money to London, where the Easybeats were being put through the ringer. They were told a more sophisticated sound was needed for the UK market, and Stevie Wright's lyrics were too naive. George had to tell his friend Stevie that he would no longer be writing songs with him, that it would be Harry Vanda from now on.
We were expected to write a hit song. So Harry and I, we locked ourselves in this room for 3-4 months to write a hit song.
Hitmaker Shel Talmy, who worked with the Kinks and The Who, took over as producer.
George took his gear down and played all the tapes. And the guy came on, nah. Have you got anything else? So George said, I've got this little riff I'm working on. 3, 4. Just a riff, nothing else. Went in, no lyrics, just a riff. And he went, I like that. Go away and finish it and bring it back. And let me hear it finished.
George and Harry were struggling to nail it, So they went to the pictures. The pre-feature was a short about an a cappella group called the Swingle Singers.
All this stuff. And George went, wow. Went back, and that's where the doo-doo-doos come from. George had nailed it.
Monday morning feels so bad. Everybody seems to nag.
Went back to see this guy and said, what do you think of this? He went, beautiful, let's record it. We went in the studio a while after. We took one take on it, one take. He went, right, next. We're all going, was that it? One take it was, and he done it.
Friday on My Mind was released on October 14th, 1966, along with 63 other singles that came out that same day.
She looks fine tonight. She is out of sight to me.
The BBC initially overlooked it. Pirate radio stations championed it, where a good many Aussie DJs worked. Finally, through November, it started to climb the charts. They were to support the Four Tops, Cream, the Rolling Stones, and the frenzy began again.
The chicks went ballistic. This big woman ran out and she dived straight on top of me. And she said, I've got you down, but I don't know what to do with you. I said, well, think of something. I wasn't getting up. I don't know why I'm staying here. They brought the curtain down. We couldn't play, they brought the curtain down. Now, this is unbelievable. You know, this is England. This is not Australia, this is England.
Friday gave the Easybeats a round-the-world ticket to fame. On the jukebox at Max's Kansas City, the coolest club in the world, Lou Reed played the Easybeats every night.
It just fell together like a dream, you know, like it doesn't happen every day.
Everything about it is just brilliant. It was kind of their Bohemian Rhapsody.
Amidst the mayhem, George wrote to his brothers back home.
Dear Mal and Angus, we're having a pretty crazy time here. Great to hear that Friday has gone to #1 in Australia. It's top 20 in the good old USA, where we are now. It's meant our lives have been pretty wild.
News of George's success was music to Ted Albert's ears, but he was already laying plans for the next generation of youngs. When he visited the family home one day, he heard something that caught his attention.
My father would say, oh, the heads of the record company's coming, you better all behave, you know, so he'd be very kind of quiet and, you know. And Ted was quite a tall man and we were all very small, so you were all kind of looking like this, you know. And he said, I heard some guitar playing. And my father said, oh, that's the two boys who'll be playing away, and you know. So, and Ted said to my dad, if they ever want to do something, send them to me.
Ted wasn't just nurturing rock talent. He was also looking for pop. But he looked in different places. When a backhoe operator called Ted Mulry appeared with a guitar and a love song, he was welcomed to the family.
Ted Mulry wandered into Albert's off the back of his backhoe. He brought in his own song, Julia, which was a great success.
Julia went to #5 in the charts in 1969. The first of 7 top 10 singles Mulry would record with the Alberts. Back in London, the Easybeats set their minds to what comes after Friday.
So now we're in a position to be internationally recognized. And now that this is so, we can start to write music that could set a trend.
Ted Albert dispatched the then 21-year-old budding filmmaker Peter Clifton to capture George and Harry's efforts for a follow-up hit.
I wanted drama. And when they started recording Heaven and Hell, and they did the high, sweet note for heaven and the deep bass, ugly note for hell, I could tell then on my handheld cameras, like by going one to the other, this was a perfect metaphor for rock and roll.
Listen, try and get more jangly effect. Very heavenish. It doesn't sound like heaven.
As they struggled to find a new popular sound, Clifton recorded the drama.
Heaven is in your eyes. The moment.
No, Steve, try and make it, sound beautiful,
Their heart was in writing simple rock and roll R&B based songs. And the kind of classic mistake that most bands make is, as the rest of the world changes, you change your music. I mean, the Beatles were obviously becoming more complex, and so everyone, I guess, thought, well, maybe we should show that we can do the same thing.
Started to change our style. We got more complicated, got far more diverse, all that sort of stuff.
They tried everything from reggae to psychedelia, to what George later described as cornball schmaltz shit, trying to keep up the momentum of Friday on My Mind.
We gave him Hello, How Are You, which was like, a soggy bloody ballad. By this time, nobody knew who the damn Easybeats were, And then there was Jimi Hendrix doing his thing and all that, so, we were toast.
Australian music's greatest band had been pulled in so many different directions and had been ripped off by so many promoters that they called it a day. It was time to come home.
Roll sound.
Steve, how have things been in England over the last couple of years?
How do you mean, how have things been?
Well, since you
General
were in
lecture.
Australia in '67, how's the group progressed since then?
Progressed?
Yeah.
Well, being in England, we've taken in a lot of influences. Alcohol.
As they started their last tour to pay off their debts, they released a song that showed everyone how brilliant they could be.
And this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to you.
Good times would become the motto for Albert's music in the decades to come. As the Easybeats disbanded, Harry made sure the next generation would continue what they'd started, handing down his beloved Gretsch Firebird to George's younger brother, Malcolm.
It was a nice guitar, but I didn't use it a lot. And Mel, the bloody thing he was playing was falling apart, it's terrible. I was like, Jesus Christ. And then he was, and he was such a hot little player anyway, so I thought, well, he deserves a good guitar, And so here it is. Best investment I ever made. What can I say? If I'd known that, I would have given him more than one.
Ted had his ear on the future too.
He gave Mal a tape recorder, and Mal would get like a couple of cardboard boxes and say, right, you just bang this when I tell you. So I'd have to try and tap along, and he'd go, now, try and keep time, for him. Yeah. So, he used it well. You know. So he got a lot of his early ideas, fiddling about with that tape recorder.
George and Harry returned to London to try their hand at becoming songwriters for hire. Ted Albert knew he hadn't heard the last of them.
Look, we had a few rough years in London where we, really had to pull all stops out to make the rent, And so we did sessions, we did anything.
Ted helped them set up a small studio. And for 4 years, the pair wrote songs and absorbed the 70s London music scene. Outsiders, sure, but they were learning how this world worked and sending songs home. Ted realised that Harry and George could write and produce great pop music, which he needed to make Albert's a success. And so a new idea began to dawn.
We were getting a lot of experience as writers by being the all-rounders that it did make us. We got to a point where, are you on a jazz song? Sure, here's your jazz song. Oh, you want a really gooey ballad? Sure, here's, are you on a rock song? Bang, We got really good at that.
In Sydney, Ted Mulry needed another hit.
It's everywhere.
Ted Albert had him try out one of George and Harry's demos. Singer and song connected immediately.
Falling in love again. Falling in love again. I lost my heart again.
And the production was Ted Albert back to his brilliant best, complete with sitar.
It's what to do and where to go.
It wasn't the raw rock sound he'd been forging, but it was perfect radio fodder.
Falling in love again. Falling in love again. I lost my
Falling in Love Again went to the top of the charts in the summer of '71. It was the beginning of a rich vein for Albert's, George and Harry's clever pop side.
I lost my heart again in a wonderful world of my own.
Writing a really good pop song that stays around for more than 7 seconds is not easy. It takes real skills. And they got onto something in their pop period which was unbelievable. It was almost like the light and the shade, the yin and the yang, and it was both coming out of this one place, Albert's.
The songs were lining up. They just needed the singers. So Ted sent producer Simon Napier Bell into the Sydney and Melbourne clubs to find some.
Superman was born and came into my life like a fire.
For an early George and Harry soul classic called Superman, they found session singer Alison McCullum.
I know I'm gonna have to get you trying just as hard as I can to get my Superman. Oh, Superman, yes I am. I'm gonna make you love me.
It went top 10 in early '72.
A lot of times, songs come up that really don't suit anybody, so they just sit on the shelf until somebody turns up who can sing them.
Albert's had already tried a few singers on a ballad called Pasadena, before Napier Bell met another Glaswegian called Young.
Such a long, long way to Pasadena.
He hadn't even heard him sing, but he had an eye for a good-looking chap and lucked out on the pop vocalist of a generation.
I went to Albert's the next day with my blue overalls on, my hair down to my ass. I looked like I'd been dragged out of a rubbish bin. And I could still see Ted Albert's face when he sort of looked at Simon Napier Bell and gone, what have you got here? What have you dragged in? And that was when he sat behind the piano and started playing Pasadena, and I nearly fainted. I just thought, what? You want me to sing that? He said, yes, but in a very special way.
Ooh, it's such a long, long way to Pasadena.
Gave me the demo and he said, I don't want to hear that other guy singing, which happened to be George Young. So I had to put the vocal exactly on top. And right at the end, actually, George is there singing it. So in actual fact, my first single was a duet.
The Albert stable of artists was building, and Ted gave a young Fifa Riccobono the task of looking after them. She would get their music onto radio, TV, and concerts. Fifa became the first female executive in Australian rock and roll history and learned to be just as tough as the boys.
I don't think there was one day that I didn't enjoy. I loved the fights I used to have to get into, especially if I won. And I knew that Ted was there, you know, as my backup. And when things didn't go right, he didn't, you know, lose it.
Ted was gathering his forces, but more than any artist, he wanted his key generals around him. As George and Harry neared the end of their rope in London, Ted threw them a lifeline that would change the course of our musical history.
Ted still hadn't given up on his dream of establishing this production company and music house that was going to set the world on fire, you know. And he actually wanted to go in business with us. And so he was thinking, so how am I going to get these guys back to Australia? Well, he made us an offer we couldn't refuse.
It was a handshake deal. No lawyers, no signatures, just a shared understanding. George and Harry returned to Sydney in 1973 with production nous and the studio tans to match. They would run the new Albert studio, find and produce talent, and split the profits equally with Ted. They later said it was like falling into a gold mine.
I'd go down to the studio, and the studio was very dark, dimly lit, 2 orange lampshades, with George and Harry smoking, and I'd sit on the back lounge, and you couldn't see for smoke.
You work during the night, don't you? Well, not through choice. Not through choice. What hour do you usually start?
Midnight.
Music's 5 parts sweat and 5 parts fairy dust, and they really had the sweat stuff down well. I mean, this was a place where you worked.
From years of working together, the differences in George and Harry's personalities melded into their songs.
It's like heart and soul. George is the heart, Harry's the soul. And so George is an absolute machine. You know, George could look at an ashtray and make it play music. And that was the way, you know, George would push ahead and push ahead. Harry tended to be a bit more laid back, sitting back there, rolling his drum cigarette. But where he was fantastic was he was the soul. When it came to feel, when it came to melodies, that's where Harry came in.
The music scene in Australia had been hijacked by hippies in George and Harry's absence.
Unfortunately, then something called flower power came up. It was all about, amen, you know.
Albert's music was about to leave the hippies eating dust. The teeny fans of pop had started to drink beer and fight. Once again, they were primed for rebellion.
Harry and George had seen it all. They knew the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows, and they set about doing it in a different way. They'd learned from some of their mistakes, and they developed this model with Ted Albert and Alberts. As a continuation of what the Easybeats could have been, they were going to produce something that really was something, and ultimately, of course, that was Akadaka.
The next milestone on the road to AC/DC was a side project they'd begun in London, the Marcus Hook Roll Band. And it brought Angus and Malcolm Young together to record for the first time with their mentors.
George had got Mal in a couple of times doing stuff. And then he rung up home and he said, is Angus there? Tell him to get his guitar and come in the studio. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And then George shows me a couple of licks of his riff that he wants to play. And I'm kind of trying to quickly learn it, and George just goes, okay, roll tape, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're away. And by the time I've learned this riff, it's near the end of the song, you know.
For years, George had boasted that his little brothers were better guitarists than anyone. Now was their chance to prove it.
George is a very self-assured guy. But if there were two guys even more self-assured than George, even tougher than George, even more defiant than George, it was Malcolm and Angus.
On a creative high from the Marcus Hook record, Harry and George approached their biggest project yet. It was a case of unfinished business for the Alberts family, the rock revival of little Stevie Wright. After the demise of the Easybeats, Stevie's career had faltered.
Stevie was pretty mixed up, and, you know, he'd never really gotten over the fact that he'd been displaced as the songwriter with George by Harry. There was a lot of stuff there.
Ted Albert knew Stevie was still the best rock frontman Australia had ever seen. It was time to re-establish their prodigal son. Harry and George set to work with him, and they came up with a riff that had such swagger, it would stop the country in its tracks.
George and Harry had Stevie in the studio and they started working with him. And Stevie was very much wanting to get back into the limelight, and he loved it. He lived to perform.
I got the money in my pocket. I got the cockies in my hand. I got myself a couple of tickets to see a rock and rollin' band. Come on, girl, just get on your shoes. We're gonna hear some sounds. Come on, babe, you know there ain't no time to mess around. Evie, let your hair hang down.
It was bogan Motown, Australia at its toughest and coolest. And Stevie Wright was just the man to sing us our song. Over the AM radio, the suburbs rocked to Australian music like never before.
Oh, I thought it was a smash. It was revolutionary. And I mean, Harry and George, that was when they really hit their peak as producers and songwriters.
At the time of its release, Evie Parts 1, 2 and 3 was over 11 minutes long, the longest single ever produced.
I don't think any of us really thought that the stations would all play 11.25 minutes of it, and they did. And it was, you know, top of the charts for 3/4 of a year.
It was a triumphant reboot for George, Harry and Stevie. Flouting the rule book gave Alberts the biggest hit single in Australian history.
What a surprise. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Alberts, who put me back in business again, and the guys that wrote Evie. A big hand for Harry and George. Harry, Vanda and George Young. Thank you very much, everybody here.
We played with Stevie Wright, and his band when I was still a student at university and trying to figure out how to play rock and roll. And they were brilliant, you know, they were a fantastic band. But Stevie, to get himself going, jumped out of the car about 2 minutes before they were due to go on and smashed his head about 3 times up against the concrete pillar and then bounced on a stage with 3 handstands and a cartwheel and, you know, you got the party up. And I sort of went, wow, surely I don't have to do that every night. It was memorable.
Stevie's album, Hard Road, promised to be a world beater. It was licensed in the US and UK, and artists like Rod Stewart covered songs from it. Stevie's next hit single cemented the Alberts' guitar sound. Like George's guitar from the Easybeats, but harder, tougher. It now had a primal urgency, goading the listener to take it on. It was George's younger brother, Malcolm, who stepped up to play rhythm for Stevie on the recording. He was the raw sound of things to come.
Malcolm was very gifted. He was just confident, solid player guitar.
Off the back of Hard Road and Black Eyed Bruiser, Stevie performed to sold-out crowds in America and Europe and seemed unstoppable. But behind the success, Stevie's manager, Michael Chugg, was keeping a terrible secret from the Alberts family.
One night I went down to the studio and they were doing the vocals for Black Eyed Bruiser. And I walked past the recording, the vocal booth, and he was doing Smack and then singing. So I walked in the studio, I said to Harry and George, I've had enough of this, come here. And we walked around and they saw what was going on. I just couldn't do it anymore. We had a real shot, like a real shot. He could have been a superstar.
It was kind of heady days when I was wrestling with my own devils at the time.
Stevie's addiction spelled the end of his recording career with Alberts.
He was so close and we were so close twice. And he was almost about to get what he wanted and it just fell over.
After years of struggle to get free of addiction, Stevie returned for the biggest concert in Australian history, the concert of the decade, and blew everyone away.
Must be a better way to say the things I feel. The love I only know with you.
When I first seen Stephen at Sydney Opera House, all of the people, as far as I could see, I was so proud of him. That's the Stephen I work with, that's the Stephen I know. But today, I cannot listen to Evie. I try, I'm getting upset thinking about it. Gotta stop. Okay, can I leave that now?
I'm nothing without you. And Evie, the sun is shining now.
It was Stevie's bravest and greatest moment.
My eyes are open now. I see so much I never knew.
That was our family. Everybody came into that. And it was a big time for Stevie. It was really all happening.
I want to thank you now.
I do remember. It was just incredible to me. 1 minute we saw that knocking about the hobbles of Sydney, just trying to get a break. I was close to 16, and next thing I got a father figure. Ted was like Brian Epstein of Australian music. And the next minute, I'm appearing in front of 500,000 people.
So much in love with you.
The Alberts musical family had come so close to cracking it overseas. But Ted Albert's work wasn't over. Waiting in the wings was the next generation.
He said, you've got to put AC/DC on. I said, who are they? And he said, George and Harry's young brothers. So we put AC/DC on at the Opera House as the opening act. And there began that story.
They would be signed by Alberts in 1974, with a 16-year-old Angus Young on lead guitar, and a frontman every bit as wild as little Stevie Wright. With older brother George and Harry Vanda at the helm, AC/DC were determined to prevail where the Easybeats had fallen.
They were there to give everything they'd learned during their run in the 60s to this band that were going to take on the world in the 70s.
Keep it real. Keep it direct. Don't go pretending you're something you're not. Be who you are, mate. And that's what AC/DC, that became their calling card. That became their ace up their sleeve. And for that, Malcolm and Angus absolutely have George Young to thank.
The clan would have their day.